What's this backup recording right here? Yeah, so you can't see it because of all the overgrowth, but the standard gauge connected about 3 utility poles down.
Okay.
And it came off, you know, the inbound track there. So the narrow gauge did not come this far.
Right.
I'm going to go on the other side of the station to get that, but this is where the standard gauge, when the Boston and Lowell put in the standard gauge, they pushed it out to here. So.
Now, was there any form of dual gauge at all?
No, there was no dual gauge.
All right.
So, and as we see, the commuter train's coming in. Okay, so this is Jim, JPH0917 with John Razuk.
What's up?
And my video series on abandoned railroads of Massachusetts is here in my neighborhood, my hometown. We're doing the Billerica and Bedford. We're standing, this platform right here is on the old standard gauge track that the Boston and Lowell put in after the abandonment of the narrow gauge. And across the bridge here, the Pleasant Street Bridge, that's where the narrow gauge North Billerica Station was. People had to get off the train, dangerously walk across the bridge as you see it now, to get over here to North Billerica Station to get trains to Boston and New Hampshire. Over there used to be a roundhouse and an old engine house to turn the engines around so they can go back to Bedford. And way off in the distance there, that electrical pole there marks where the tracks separate. The Boston and Lowell main line forked to the left and the Billerica and Bedford forked to the right. And you can see the switch stand where the tracks now connect, because they used to connect on the other side down further, but when they remodeled the station in '98, they relocated the switch to right down there. So, and if I pan a little bit over, there's John, pan a little bit over to that building on the other side of the train station, that's the old engine house of the Billerica and Bedford that became a baggage house for the Boston and Maine, and now it's a privately owned building by the Hughes Lumber Company. So this is North Billerica Station. This was the northern terminus of the Billerica and Bedford Railroad. Now this is in front of the Marshall Middle School. As you can see, it's cleared just halfway down there, and right where you see the telegraph poles kind of bear off to the right, that was the northern deviation point between the narrow gauge and the standard gauge. The standard gauge bared to the right. The narrow gauge kind of bared off to the left and went up Town Hill and went to Billerica Center on the west. Oh no, on the east, while the standard gauge went on the west, because the west side of Town Hill had a much easier grade than going straight up Town Hill on the east side. So this is where the abandonment of the Billerica and Bedford Railroad technically begins. Okay, we are at the northern deviation point between the standard gauge and the narrow gauge. Right about here, the standard gauge right-of-way is to our left, and it's coming and going towards the main road to the west to go along the western slope of Town Hill, because it was easier grade for a standard gauge. Right here, this is where the narrow gauge would have come across. This is Heritage Lane. It did not exist until about the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. And the narrow gauge went right around over there. In the fall it's easier to see, but now that we're in summertime and the vegetation's all grown in, it's not really, you can't really tell too much, but this is where the narrow gauge track went. Used to be a great big silo right here, and they were a big customer for the standard gauge. And I'm just going to move over here to the corner to see where the track officially ends. Okay, we are at the Boston Road Route 3A crossing here in Billerica. We're actually right where Billerica and North Billerica meet. Everything that way is North Billerica, everything behind me is Billerica. As you see, there's two tracks here. The one closest to me, this one right here, served the grain mill silo building that was here, and it did not cross the road. The one further away, that was the main track, the standard gauge track. And right over there, as you can see where the track officially ends, and the New England frame business right here technically does not own it. It is technically still a railroad track right up to the side of Pro Fitness, which was Grossman's lumber company back in the 70s and early 80s. This is where the Bennett Hall station was. The Bennett family had a nice little plantation up here on Town Hill, which they opened up for tourism, and people would come here and picnic and everything. And they had their own station right here. So this was Bennett Hall Station, and the track was abandoned from Bedford to Billerica in '62, then from Billerica to Bennett Hall in '75, and there is no record of it being abandoned any further. So technically this is still an active railroad line. If PanAm wanted to come in here, clear this out and put the track back in, they very well can. There's nothing anybody can do to stop them. So next thing we're going to look at is we're going to follow the standard gauge to Billerica, and then we'll follow the narrow gauge after that. So stay tuned. This is the right-of-way in a new neighborhood that didn't exist when the tracks came through, but we're just a little bit beyond Bennett Hall Station. We're looking towards Billerica High School and the athletic fields, and this is where the track used to come through as it was approaching Bennett Hall Station, and that's looking towards Billerica Center in Bedford that way. So this is another place where the right-of-way can be seen. Pretty good. Okay, so we're here at the Billerica High School, or Billerica Memorial High School, Alumni Memorial Field, where soccer and lacrosse is played. And this is where the standard gauge Billerica and Bedford Boston and Lowell replacement came. As you can see, the grading is much easier than it is on the other side of the center, where it's a lot more steeper. And this is where the track came through. And we've gone right down there. You can't see it. It's better, like I said, in the winter when there's no vegetation. But the Billerica Station was right down there on River Street. That's probably be our next destination. But at least the high tension wires still mark the right-of-way. Okay, this is the Billerica train station on the standard gauge. That's River Street directly in front of us. The old train station was taken down in the late 90s to make way for all these new condos that are here. That's called Concord Crossing. And right around here is where the track was. And there's a little gully behind those where these bushes are growing out of, where the right-of-way was. But if you look way down there, you can see where the River Street Railroad crossing was, and the standard gauge track heading south towards Bedford. Okay, this is the Richardson Street crossing. This is where the standard gauge right-of-way went, and you can see that there is a little clearing there in the among the vegetation. This is where the standard gauge track continued. We're looking towards Concord Road down there, Middlesex Turnpike, South Billerica and Bedford. And that's where we'll be headed down there next, to the Concord Road and to the little bridge where the trolley line went under the Boston and Maine, or the Billerica and Bedford standard gauge track. Okay, this is the Cabot Corporation off Concord Road. And that is the bridge that carried the tracks over the trolley line. And this is the whole trolley line for the Lexington Street Railway Company, which competed with the Boston and Maine for the passenger service on the old Billerica and Bedford. And maybe we can get up there a little bit further and take pictures from up on the right-of-way. So this is the little bridge that carried the Billerica and Bedford standard gauge track over the Lexington Street Railway. Come up here on the bridge, you see, that's where the trolley tracks went, right here. But of course the trolley tracks right away is all filled in with water, and that's looking north towards Billerica Center Station. You can probably just barely see Richardson Street at the far end. And then there's the filled in gully again with all the water. That's where the street railway went. And right there, folks, is the Concord Road railroad crossing. And right over there is a monument to the trolley. And our next stop will be Middlesex Turnpike, which is right just down there outside the picture. Alright, this is the Middlesex Turnpike crossing. This is where Middlesex Crossing Station would have been. The right-of-way goes right into the woods there. A lot of people think that's the right-of-way, but it's not, because that's actually the electrical power company's right-of-way. The track went that way, and it's heading towards its southern deviation point with the narrow gauge. So just turn around. I can show you the other side of the crossing. Now that's the Middlesex Turnpike crossing looking towards the Concord Road crossing. It's now part of the electrical distribution thing that's right on the other side of the bush there. But that's where the track went, right where that fence is. So this was the Middlesex Turnpike crossing for the standard gauge. The narrow gauge is less than a quarter mile up the road on the side of the hill.